Let me ask Mr. Byer. I mean, is there anything in this bill that will raise taxes on people earning $400,000 or less?
Mr. Chairman, there absolutely is not. And I don't know, maybe if we repeat 87,000 agents enough times, somebody will believe it. But there's nothing in this bill that suggests this will go when only 11% of IRS employees are that. In fact, Mr. Chairman, I have a recent page from the Joint Committee on Taxation report that I believe the ranking member was referring to, and taxes actually go down in the first 9 categories next year. And not until 2027 do taxes go up 0.1% for people making more than $200,000. Who knows who will even be president then? The whole point here is to raise taxes on, well, let's go back a year. 95 of the biggest 500 corporations in America pay 0 in corporate taxes. So we're only saying if you make more than $1 billion a year in profit, or you have to pay this 15% minimum tax. I don't think there's a single small business in America making more than $1 billion a year.
So basically, the people who are opposed to this don't want to tax billionaires.
Exactly right. This is just taking the tax cheats or the people who are unfairly using the tax avoidance things because they have the best lawyers in the world to avoid all taxes.
And I've been watching some of the news shows, and we heard it here today from some of the testimony that there's a scare campaign going on. I mean, I think the Republicans do not want to talk about lowering the cost of prescription drugs for people or investing in efforts to combat climate change or lowering health care costs or energy costs or any of those things. They want people to look someplace else. And so now we're hearing about this army of IRS auditors. Just for the record, I mean, am I right? Is Charles Rettig the commissioner of IRS?
He is. I'm hoping that wasn't one of the corrupt IRS commissioners that my friend, the ranking member, was referring to.
Who appointed him? I'm just
I
curious.
belied that was President Donald Trump.
Can you say it one more time? Because I want to make sure.
Yeah, President Donald Trump appointed.
So this is Trump's
Commissioner
IRS commissioner who we're talking about here today. Let me read from a letter that he sent to the House of Representatives on August 4th. He said these resources that are in this bill are absolutely necessary. These resources are absolutely not about increasing audit scrutiny on small businesses or middle-income Americans. As we've been planning, our investment of these enforcement resources is designed around the Department of Treasury's directive that audit rates will not rise relative to recent years for households making under $400,000. Other resources will be invested in employees and IT systems that will allow us to better serve all taxpayers, including small businesses and middle-income taxpayers. Enhanced IT systems and taxpayer service will actually mean that honest taxpayers will be better able to comply with the tax laws, resulting in a lower likelihood of being audited and a reduced burden on them, end quote. I'm going to ask unanimous consent that his letter to all of us, this is Donald Trump's appointed commissioner of the IRS. You know, it really, one of the things that people hate about Washington and about politicians is that people exaggerate the truth and sometimes go to really remarkable extremes to exaggerate. Someone showed me a tweet that our former colleague and former Governor Nikki tweeted. She said, Biden's IRS is now going to have more staff than the Pentagon, State Department, FBI, and Border Patrol combined. That's the tweet that she sent out to everybody, and that's what people have been. I've heard people repeat that. It's a ridiculous claim. I'm not quite sure where it even started. I don't know about you, Mr. Byer, or my other colleagues here, but we're getting lots of calls to my district office from constituents who are owed money by the IRS. And, you know, a lot of time has gone by, and they're wondering where the hell is their check. They have questions, and they can't get their calls returned, all because there is this huge backlog. And so they wonder, what are you going to do about it? And so they actually believe we should invest more so that their returns can be processed in a more timely fashion. I mean, it is the estimated staffing number that's covered in this bill is funding provided over 10 years, and many of the additional staff, as you pointed out, I think it's important for anybody who's watching here, understand this, many of these additional staff will replace a significant number of people who are retiring, right? About 50,000 are expected to leave over the next 6 years. So let me say this clearly. You did, but I want to say it again. At no time will the IRS have 87,000 new auditors. As far as the size of the IRS workforce, and then going to what Nikki Haley and some of my other Republican colleagues have been replacing, I mean, when they say, more employees than the Pentagon, State Department, and if you, I mean, like, what the hell are they talking about? I mean, I wasn't very good in arithmetic, but you do a quick Google search and you can figure this out, right? I mean, there are currently 7 times as many civilian employees at the Department of Defense than at the IRS. And when you take into account the entire department, including military personnel, it's about 35 times the size of the IRS. And then we add in all, all these other departments. I mean, that's, to say that, to try to deliberately scare people by misrepresenting the truth so deliberately, it's unconscionable. So I ask everyone, stop spreading this misinformation. I get it. Maybe you don't want funding for the IRS because you believe that millionaires and billionaires should escape paying taxes with impunity. Or these big corporations, should not pay their fair share in taxes and get away with it with impunity. But more funding means more resources to crack down on wealthy tax cheaters and corporate tax dodgers. And more funding means that my constituents, those who shop at Walmart, those who are struggling to make ends meet, can get their refunds on time, because it's a big deal for them to get their refunds. And so I just think it's important to clarify the record. I don't know if you have anything to add, Mr.
Just quickly adding that whether it's 10 million backlogged individual claims or 20 million, as my friend, the ranking member of Ways and Means said, you can't address that without more people. So there's nothing in this bill that says how the money has to be spent except to unclog this backlog. By the way, the IRS uses software from the 1960s and 70s called COBOL that they can't find anybody that knows that software anymore. Those people are quickly dying out. A huge part of this is to updo the information technology systems to the 21st century to deal with this huge backlog.
So I've heard a number of claims and fear-mongering about the impacts of this bill. So I just want to set the record straight with a couple of questions. Chairman Yarmouth, how does this bill lower energy costs for Americans?
Well, thank you, Chairman McGovern. What it does is ultimately provides tax credits for people to not just buy electric vehicles. And I'm kind of amused by the rhetoric of our Republican friends who talk about luxury vehicles of $80,000. That's the cap on what you can get a credit for in this. And plus there's also an income level cap of $150,000 per individual, $300,000 a couple. So the wealthiest people can't use this credit at all. But you will be able to have moderate income people being able to get a $4,000 credit for used electric vehicles, which will then allow them to save money on their energy costs. You have money in this bill to combat or to mitigate discrimination that has historically affected rural farmers, women, minority farmers, Native American farmers. A lot of those programs will help increase the income of people who have been discriminated against historically. And of course, what you have in overall is an overall effort to provide incentives for people to invest in solar and other renewable energy sources that will over time significantly reduce their overall energy expenditures.
Mr. Pallone, do you have anything to add?
Mr. Chairman, look, the bottom line is that if we continue to rely on fossil fuels, these are coming primarily from very volatile countries, and it's a monopoly, right, with OPEC. They just keep driving up the prices. As you move towards renewables, you're less reliant on this volatile fossil fuel market. And as a result, energy prices start to come down. and and the average person pays less. I mean, it's that simple. I mean, we just can't continue to rely on all these terrible countries overseas, volatile Mideast, different places, Venezuela, places that have all kinds of political problems because ultimately it costs us more. So it's not only a question of addressing the climate crisis and the weather conditions. I mean, even the weather conditions, one of the reasons why we have problems with the electricity grid, or the main reason, is because of because of climate change and hot weather and terrible storms and tornadoes and all of that. And, essentially what we're doing between this bill and the infrastructure bill that we passed is hardening the grid, making it easier to move towards renewables, which in the long run are going to be a lot more reliable and bring costs down. So long term, I mean, I have a statistics here. I don't want to keep talking because I know that some have to go, but I have a statistic here that shows an analysis by Resource for the Future that found that this bill would save households between $170 and $220 annually in reduced electricity price. So I mean, we're talking about lower prices for everyone as we move towards renewables in general.
Well, thank you. The gentlelady from Washington said in her opening statement that this bill will hurt senior citizens, but AARP disagrees. And they just sent us a letter on behalf of 38 million of their members asking us to pass this bill. And they said, and I quote, "The legislation will also give peace of mind to millions of seniors with high drug costs by capping their out-of-pocket Part D spending at $2,000 per year," end quote. I ask unanimous consent to insert that in the record. And let me just say to my friends, I mean, allowing Medicare to negotiate for cheaper drugs and capping the costs is wildly popular. I mean, amongst Democrats, independents, and even Republicans. 73% of the American people support allowing Medicare to negotiate prices. 73%. 76% support capping costs. 76%. Who doesn't support this? Big Pharma, I guess, doesn't support it. So let me ask you, Chairman Yamworth, how would this act reduce out-of-pocket costs for Medicare beneficiaries?
Well, obviously, if you, first of all, cap out-of-pocket expenses on pharmaceuticals at $2,000 a year, you're saving an awful lot. You're saving millions of Americans significant amounts of money. We have many seniors who pay $10,000, $12,000 or more. If they get a cancer diagnosis or another serious illness, they're going to pay multiples of that. So when you cap out-of-pocket expenses at $2,000, you're saving them an enormous amount of money. And then, of course, for those 14 million or so who the portions on Medicare who do have diabetes and rely on insulin, you're saving them a significant amount of money as well. I mean, to be honest, while I support the cap, I don't really like the way it's being done, because all we're doing is essentially subsidizing the exorbitant pricing of the pharmaceutical companies who are making insulin. And I wish we could actually just, and when the negotiation portion of the bill kicks in 2026, hopefully we can mitigate that because we can negotiate their prices. But for the next few years, all we'll be doing is subsidizing their exorbitant pricing today. But still, in terms of the average Medicare beneficiary, capping their out-of-pocket expense of $2,000 is an enormous benefit. In many cases, it will be a life-saving benefit.
Mr. Pallone, Mr. Byer, do you have anything you want to add?
Well, let me just say this, Chairman McGovern. I don't like to use the term egregious, but I did in this case, because I think that when the Republicans initiated Medicare Part D and they insisted on putting in a prohibition on negotiated prices by the government, what they did was stifle competition. In other words, every other country in the world negotiate prices because you have an ability to do that because you're buying so much drugs through the Medicare program. Why in the world would we not use our clout in a competitive way to say, look, if you want to sell all this stuff to me, to the US government for Medicare, well, then you're going to have to negotiate with me. Why put in a prohibition that says you can't? Um, you know, if the government could have, or they could not have, they could have chose to or not to, but they specifically said no. And I was there. We're not going to do it. And that's because pharma didn't want it, and it's just a giveaway to them. So that's the biggest way. Every time I've tried, and I don't want to get into, I don't like to be too partisan here, but that's the one thing that the Republicans would not want to touch. When anytime we would say, look, let's talk about lowering drug costs, they might talk about the rebate, the inflation factor, they might talk about capping out-of-pocket costs, but they would never agree to have the government negotiate prices. And we know that that's the biggest thing that brings down prices. And every other country in the world, every other developed country in the world does it. And if we're supposed to be an example of a market economy, why can't we? Why say we can't do it? It's just not fair. It's not fair to the seniors. That's the biggest thing that will lower prices for senior citizens in the drug market.
Thank you. Mr. Byer.
Just very briefly, Mr. Chairman, I think one of the things that was raised by both the gentlelady in Washington and the gentleman in Texas is the notion that we won't develop any new drugs, so we won't cure Alzheimer's. The CBO suggests that 1% of new drugs for the next 30 years will not be developed. That 99% of the new drugs that will be developed anyway. But at the same time, today, 25% of Americans can't afford the drugs that are already prescribed. It seems like a huge win to me to be able to make today's drugs affordable rather than miss 1 out of 100 in the years to come. By the way, the 99 that will be developed are the 99 that have the greatest impact on people's lives.
And just one last question, Mr. Byer, because I just want to make sure that everybody, the current commissioner of IRS was appointed by which president?
I believe that was President Trump.
Thank you very much. Look, let me just close by saying, look, we're here today to lower costs for hardworking American families. And this bill, as you have heard, will lower prescription drug costs, protect affordable care coverage for millions of people in this country, and lowers energy costs for consumers. And we're also making the boldest investment in our history to combat the climate crisis. As I said in my opening, putting our country on the path to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 40% by 2030. And this bill will start to unrig our tax code by finally making corporations and the wealthy start to pay their fair share in taxes. My constituents all have to pay their fair share. Yours do too. Why is it that we have a system where millionaires and billionaires and big corporations can get away, as you pointed out in your opening, Mr. Byer, many not paying any taxes at all? It's outrageous. It's an insult to our constituents. And we're doing this all while actually reducing the deficit. And I would just point out for the record, something when my friends were last in charge didn't care very much about. And we are actually doing that. So this is a good deal for hardworking American families. I'm proud to support this historic legislation. And with that, I'm happy to yield back